right, we will welcome everybody in this evening. Thankful once again to be back for our last lesson tonight of this series of our church leadership series covering the church clerk position. We have with us tonight Brother Chris Harper from Faith Missionary Baptist Church down in Franklin, Indiana. As many up here will know him very well because he also gets put to a lot of work in the associational meetings and things of that nature as well, and has experience in those parts. But as usual, for those that are joining us live, either here on Facebook, feel free to put questions, comments, things of that nature in the comments. We will be watching those throughout the stream before we turn it over to him. Please pray for him. Let's pray that, as with all of these that we've been doing, that they will just go to where it needs to go and help those that it's intended for. But at this time, we'll turn it over to Brother Harper.
Thanks, Brother Jeremy. I would like to start us off in prayer tonight, if we can, and definitely would seek an interest in each of our prayers this evening, just hoping to bring forward what the Lord would have about this position. I feel like it's a really important position within the churches, and so just want to bow our hearts in prayer. Our Heavenly Father God, as we bow before you this evening, Lord, we come to you, Lord, appreciative of the opportunity to come together and to learn about the church leadership and tonight in the church clerk position. God, as I have studied this and tried to wrap my head around the best way to communicate this work, God, I just point myself back to you and trying to honor and to glorify you and to be a servant to your church. And so I ask that you would be with each one as they take part in tonight's lesson. God, that you would show yourselves to us in a mighty way, and that you would get honor and glory out of what will be brought forward. God, be with the lost, most importantly, that are in our families. God, we know of so many that are in need of salvation, God, and we beg that you would just save them and save them quickly, and that they would turn their lives towards you. Lord, we ask that you would be with this as it would go out later through YouTube or Facebook or other avenues, Lord, that our church members could grow, Lord, and could glean from best practices, Lord, or recommendations, Lord, so that we can, again, try to honor and glorify you in the work that we do. Lord, we love you. We thank you, Lord, for all that you do, and just ask that you be with us tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So good evening. My name is Brother Chris Harper, as Brother Jeremy mentioned. I got the phone call from Brother Jeremy a couple months ago asking me to lead in this discussion. First told him that he had got the wrong number and called the wrong person, but am honored to be able to serve in this capacity, to be able to talk about being a church clerk. I want to thank Brother Jeremy in coordinating these lessons. He's done a great job in coordinating and being kind of the facilitator of these things, as was brought forth in kind of the Sunday or Saturday men's Bible study of the ministers and the work that was done at Bethel to kind of start all of this off. But additionally, I want to thank Elder Jeff Moran, Brother Dean Hoskins, Brother Donnie Binion on the great lesson for the work of their work of a deacon. Those lessons were great to me as a deacon, and I gleaned from those. I want to thank Brother Chuck Durant for his lesson on the work of a Sunday school teacher, and Brother Chuck Porter on the work of a church treasurer. And want to kind of highlight tonight or bring forward tonight, most of the discussion that I'm going to talk about tonight is well known. This is not something that is a surprise to many, as the work of a church clerk is very much so a part of the church work in documenting things. But I want to make mention of Brother Billy Moran's handbook for missionary Baptist churches and highlight that a lot of what I say tonight is included in that work. If you ever have an opportunity to study through that book, I highly recommend it. You'll be blessed and enlightened by it for sure. Brother Moran does a wonderful job in outlining the work and the history of the missionary Baptist church, as well as the roles and responsibilities for us as a church and church members. So thank you to Brother Moran in that. As we begin, I want to kind of introduce and kind of set the ground as to who I am and why Brother Jeremy thought it was a good idea to recruit me. It really wasn't. But my name is Chris Harper, and I serve as the clerk of Faith Missionary Baptist Church in Franklin, Indiana, as he already mentioned. I've been in that role for roughly 7 years. During that time, I was also elected as the clerk for the Bethel Missionary Baptist Association. Both clerk roles, I feel like, have been very interesting over the last 5 to 7 years, but am blessed to be able to serve in that capacity. And lastly, I serve as a deacon for Faith and have been elected to clerk multiple different occasions during organizations or ordinations, and most recently was elected to clerk at the Organization of Charity Missionary Baptist Church this past month. So in this lesson tonight, I want to dive in and really kind of discuss 4 to 5 really topics of discussion, and we'll elaborate on much of them. But first, I kind of have those 4 guiding categories. So I want to introduce the position of a church clerk. I think it's important to note, hey, here's the basic responsibilities of a church clerk, and understand some kind of core values that are really important in that work. I want to dive in a little bit deeper in the roles and responsibilities and what that looks like as a church clerk. I want to talk about some record keeping recommendations that I would have for you, some tips and tricks, and then lastly, a summary and or questions as to what we could help to assist in this lesson. So first and foremost, what is a church clerk? Well, the church clerk is a temporary position that serves mostly in the background of the church. This person's been elected by the congregation to oversee the records and record keeping of a church. The church clerk is responsible to the pastor and the congregation for documenting the actions of a church during business meetings and special service proceedings. So example here would be a reception of new members or any membership movement. And as a church clerk, we should be keeping those records in a safe and secure method and readily accessible in times of need. Next question will be here, can anyone be a church clerk? And the answer is yes. Technically, by standard, anyone who is a member of the Lord's church can be elected into the position. Do I think that everyone should be a church clerk? Maybe not. With that said, I highly recommend churches evaluate the individual that they're electing and to ensure they are effective in their work. I think this is extremely important, especially when we talk about record keeping and the work that they're doing. A couple of traits that I would really look for in a church clerk would be someone who is present. Sounds really silly, but they have to be present in order to document business meetings or special service proceedings that may take place. If they aren't there, they can't document the happenings of the church. And so I feel like that's just first and foremost, someone who is present and able to be there. Next, I would say someone who has a sense of orderliness and organization. I know my wife is going to laugh at that when I say it. However, the clerk should have a system to ensure minutes are stored and secured, while also allowing quick access to those minutes when questions arise regarding previous motions. I'll refer back to that one a little bit later on. However, I'll refer back to this one a little bit later on, but however, a clerk's job is to be an accurate documenter of church proceedings. Our job is to document those proceedings, not so much to editorialize or give our opinions about what's going on. And then lastly, and certainly this is one opens for some pushback, but the clerk should be able to hear well and have a good hearing. While this seems very trivial and you're thinking, Brother Chris, did you really need to mention that tonight? Hearing what's said and done during a business meeting is extremely vital to being able to accurately document the proceedings of the business meeting. So last question here, is the clerk the same person who documents, is the church clerk the same person who documents in special services such as ordinations or church organizations? And I would say maybe. In my case, as I previously mentioned, I serve as the clerk of faith while also serving as a deacon. During an ordination service, the presbytery is assembled, is a group of ordained brethren who are assembled to ordain a good brother or to assist in establishing a church out of a mission. Anyone in that presbytery can be elected to be the church clerk or to be the presbytery clerk or the ordination clerk. Thus, it would be possible to serve in both capacities, both church clerk and also clerk for one of those special services. If that clerk or if the individual church clerk is not ordained, then they would not be eligible to be able to clerk in that service, and it's not anything negative towards them. It would just be a part of the presbytery's job to elect an ordained member to be a part of that clerk role in the presbytery. So some roles and responsibilities of a church clerk. While it seems extremely obvious as a responsibility, the church clerk must maintain true, accurate, and thorough minutes of the church's proceedings during business meetings and special service proceedings. As a good practice, the church or the clerk should be prepared to take record of any proceedings at any point in the service. For me, this has been known to be a note on my phone or a draft email or my chicken scratch on a piece of paper until I'm able to enter it into a digital format once I'm near a computer. These minutes should include motions made by the congregation with the exact wording of the motion written down. Again, I'll reiterate here, it's not up to my interpretation as to what the motion should be or what the motion's trying to say. It is my job as the clerk to record accurately what was said because that is what the church is voting on. This may mean the clerk either has to ask the motion maker or the moderator to repeat the motion as often as it takes in order to record the verbiage used. Shameless plug for my pastor here, but Brother Derek does an excellent job in ensuring that I am able to record the motion accurately, either by repeating it multiple times, and I'll give him a high sign, or it is, hey, he's asking for clarification of the motion maker to do so. Clerk's recommendation here, hey, if you're a church clerk, don't be afraid to speak up and request clarification on wording if something isn't clear. Again, our job as a clerk is to accurately document those words for our history, and so that we're able to follow those as a church body. Motion makers, please make sure you're speaking clearly and loud enough for the congregation to hear. Brother Jeremy's laughing here, but it is oftentimes that we have to ask them to speak up so that the congregation can hear what is said. I put that in there as a little bit of jest, but make sure we're being clear and accurate for what we're trying to make a motion on. Another point to bring up regarding minutes is the practice of recording who the motion maker was, as well as who the member seconding the motion. As I was talking to Brother Dean Hoskins and Brother Donnie a couple weeks ago, we discussed this about why it's super important to do that. It's not a practice that I have personally done in the past, but they talked specifically about, hey, if there's ever a question, especially regarding kind of pivotal motions or important motions, it's really important to have that motion maker in the second be able to be documented so that you're able to go back to that if there's ever a need for a clarification or an amendment or whatever that may be. And again, not every church practices that, but it really does allow those motions to be directed back to the individual who's made that motion if is necessary. This leads to my next point. Clerks, make sure you and your pastor are on the same page. As a clerk, your pastor is relying on you to make sure he is moving through the business conference meeting in an appropriate manner. There have been times where I've had to remind my pastor, hey, Brother Derek, we forgot to talk about correspondence, or hey, we need to talk about committee reports. That's okay. Our goal is to complete the same task and make sure the church is functioning appropriately. Brother Moran mentions this in his handbook, but in the absence of a pastor, the clerk may be tasked with calling the church to business order to allow for a temporary monitor to be appointed. Again, that's a rare occasion. However, it could be something that the clerk needs to take action on once we start business meeting. So as we move on down and when we talk about receiving and sending correspondence, as you might suspect, the clerk's job is to ensure all relevant correspondence is brought before the church in a timely fashion. If correspondence is sent to someone other than the clerk, please make sure that correspondence gets to the clerk to allow time for him or her to review it prior to business meeting. The last thing we want is for a letter to be read that isn't needing to be read, and or something that shouldn't be read in a public setting to be read in that nature. I would just point out the clerk can't bring correspondence before the church if they're not aware of it, and so it's super important to get that correspondence back to them. Another main correspondence responsibility that falls in line with our next point here is maintaining the membership roll. And I think it's super important when a member joins a church body from another church, be sure to send their letter of recommendation promptly. As the church clerk, it's our responsibility, once the church has authorized it, to send that letter of recommendation, and then also to read that recommendation when it's received back from the requesting or from the sending church. And talking about letters of recommendation, a good practice is to provide accurate statements regarding church membership, even when it's difficult. And I've been guilty of this before. My example here would, and I had heard this from another brother at one point, while that's not super popular to provide some difficult statements, if a church hasn't had contact with an individual for several years, how are they supposed to provide a recommendation of that member? And I saw this recently at the organization at Charity. Several of those members had been recently baptized, and Outreach did a great job of saying, hey, we recognize this individual as a member of our church. They were recently baptized. And I think that was a great practice that they did there. While examining the membership roll, the clerk should not bear this burden alone, in my opinion. I think this is the job of not just the clerk, but the assistant clerk, and could be part of the congregation. The clerk may be the one physically documenting the membership changes as such as a death or a transfer, but I highly recommend getting a committee of members together, ranging in tenure from the oldest to the youngest, to ensure that we're maintaining the membership roll accurately of the church. I may not hear about a death within the church, or someone who's not been attending for a long time having some sort of issue or movement within the church, and it's important for all of us to kind of tackle that head on. Moving on down, assigning or another responsibility clerks hold that's often overlooked is signing official documents on behalf of the church. Many government forms, such as tax exemptions and bylaws, are actually signed by the church clerk, notarizing that they are accurately based on the wishes of the church, wishes and orders of the church itself. Recently, I had to sign stating that a member, I shouldn't say recently, in the past, I've had to sign saying a membership change or a member change on a bank account, and had to provide letterhead and a copy of the minutes in order to have that member placed onto the account, and then a different member removed from the account there. Lastly, or not, excuse me, not lastly, but on down, a good practice of the church clerk is maintaining an active committee list for those committees selected by the congregation. I think this prevents duplication of work and allows those who are not fully engaged to better understand work being done by the committees. It allows point people to be contacted and or questions to be asked outside of business meeting that would allow for further discussion. And then lastly here, if your church is a part of an association such as the Siloam, Bethel, Wiseman, as examples, the clerk would be the one to prepare the letter outlining information requested by the association. One tip that I hold to and recommend is to make a note as a part of your monthly minutes anytime there's a change in membership. While that seems very simple, it allows me at the end of the year to say, hey, I know there were 3 baptisms, there was 1 death, and then there were 2 letters of movement within the church and 2 letters of movement without or outside of the church to another sister church there. This allows the clerk, it's him or her, to document membership changes on that associational letter and get it sent in promptly to the association clerk. Shameless prompt send of the association clerk. Record keeping. When I was handed the clerk roll back in 2016, I was literally just handed over a stack of books. And so the question I have here is, do I really need to store those books from 1892? And the answer is yes. Absolutely. This is a permanent record of the workings of the church throughout the business meetings and membership rolls. And these books were handwritten minutes that I was handed and membership roll of the church. For several years, I'll be honest, those books sat on the shelf in my home where they collected dust and were not protected from any harm that could have come their way. Unfortunately, that was the case. And I later realized how important it was to take better care of those. And I would petition to you that as the church clerk, it's our responsibility to ensure the records of that church history are kept safe and secure from fire, flood, or loss. We as the church now store those documents in a fireproof safe here at the church. And it's important to note, if you're not doing that, you're putting the church's history at risk. That history is used for a ton of different things, both within the church and outside the church. And so it's super important to have that. Brother Moran makes a great point in his handbook to reference times when a church clerk would hold minutes hostage when another church clerk was elected. As clerks, we serve the church. And in serving the church, we should be passing along any records to the next clerk in a timely manner. It's not for us to hold on to those or to hold those hostage. We should be passing those along. I'll mention here, I'll wait till later. So how do these records benefit us, or what is the benefit to maintaining these documents? Well, first and foremost, our records serve as legal documents in both protection and validity of our independent church body. Well-kept records are the best protection against lawsuits and provide an orientation and grounding to new members joining the congregation and church leaders. Documents such as bylaws, rules of decorum, and other standard procedures should be readily accessible to any member requesting them so that they're able to understand the inner workings of the church. Church records can be used in instances where historical context is needed to move forward in a situation. I would go back to an example I have here where we had a motion that was reportedly on the books for 40 years. And as I was researching and trying to find that motion, trying to decipher some of this cursive handwriting and handwriting that was there, it was difficult to go through those, and it was a lot of work to try to find those, but I was able to easily find, hey, either yes, this was in a motion, or no, it wasn't. And here's what we found. And so really kind of super important to have some historical context in that situation. Next question I have on the slide here: how are records kept, or how are our records used in today's society? Records in today's society are needed for more than you initially imagine. I already gave the example of opening a bank account or changing those responsible for an account. If your church files taxes, it could be a part of those taxes or articles of incorporation, and then the list could go on and on and on with this. We know it's super important for us to have these documents readily available in case churches ever get audited, as was talked about last week. So as the church clerk, we're seen as the conduit to providing access to those records needed to complete governmental or legal documentation for the church, and we should be maintaining those on a regular cadence. I personally do not maintain this, but Brother Corey maintains our articles of incorporation with the state or the state attorney general, so that we're an accurate and reported appropriately entity with the state. Lastly, the question here is, should I be preparing or maintaining lists of elected officers in the church? And I would tell you, this is a practice that I perform, but it's not required. I would say that in doing this, working closely with the congregation and the pastor is super important to have this as a good practice. Why is it important? Because officers such as trustees or treasurers often have to be updated on different forms and or different materials. And then also it's good to be able to point people to the person responsible for whatever it may be in the church. So probably the weight of my lesson here is here on this tips and tricks slide. And so first and foremost, I would call to you that there are 5 kind of tips and tricks that I'd really like to hit on tonight, but each one has its own kind of subpoints. So I would argue that preparation is one of the most important steps in being an effective and efficient church clerk. And why I said that's important truly is we are seen as that conduit to the church, and being able to provide those minutes and provide the resources to the Can you hear me?
There you go. It stopped at resources and then sort of cut out there.
Yeah, perfect. So I apologize for connectivity issues. So prior to a business meeting and in preparing, I will often look back over the minutes to from the previous month to ensure I do not have any spelling or grammatical errors. While that seems very small, I want to produce and put forth the best copy of the minutes that I have. Most often, I will have a printed copy of the minutes in my hand reading from them, while also having a digital copy here at the desk so that I'm able to make changes or editing on the spot if needed. Other preparation type things to consider would be preparation of quick reference documents for the pastor and or your assistants during elections. I talked about having those lists of who the officers were in the as a quick reference guide, but I think it's important, especially when we come to elections, to know who were the incumbents to those positions, while also having the ability to have a line for nominations and finally who is elected. Preparation also has often included a quick conversation with different members to have a pulse on potential motions that may be upcoming. If I know that a motion has very specific wording, I will preemptively ask that individual to write it out and pass it on to me following business meeting to ensure I've captured that motion in its full and true wording. Being prepared to be a historian or finder of information sometimes can take some time. It is extremely important to understand that you will be relied upon to find historical context when needed. I mentioned that motion that we were searching for. Don't be afraid to solicit help from your assistant or other members in reviewing material so that you're able to make that or present that historian type material back to them. Motions of significance. It's important to maintain a document with motions of great significance or change. I see Brother Dean's on tonight, and so I would tell you that this came from Brother Dean Hoskins when he was a clerk at Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church in Indianapolis. He kept a record of motions of great significance or change within the church for quick reference to things that could be brought up and that provided history for those that would ask questions. This could include things like when the church was organized, to when a specific pastor was called, or a specific building upgrade was authorized or completed. Thanks, Brother Dean, for that great tip. It will be something that I add to my repertoire of tips and tricks. Next, let's talk about the movement to a digital age. And I think this is probably a pain point for a lot of people, but many of us work in secular jobs where we utilize computers or smartphones for the majority of our work. I would tell you technology doesn't have to be a bad thing. Frequently we hear that, oh, technology isn't the greatest thing in the world, but if we're able to digitally both store and record and able to kind of hang on to materials that would be easily forgotten or lost or misplaced or illegible, we should be using technology. And I think it's a great opportunity here. Even this PowerPoint, hey, it's a PowerPoint or a Word document or whatever it may be. Feel free to use technology in documenting things. Some storage solutions. I talked earlier about a fireproof safe. I think it's super important to have that fireproof safe, but one of the things that I would like to do in the near future is get all of those documents scanned into a digital copy or digital form and be able to kind of transcribe those at some point to be that Word document or legible piece of material. Things like Dropbox or a solid state drive or different storage platforms, Google or Google Docs, or however you would like to store this. I think they're super important in maintaining records. One fear that I have with maintaining physical copies is what happens if something happens to that physical copy, now it's gone. I'll tell you, in the history of Faith Church, there was a USB that held a section of minutes from about 2000 to 2005 that we can no longer find because it was misplaced. And so make sure you're backing up the things that you're doing or things that you're utilizing in order to have good storage solutions. Lastly, here on this movement to a digital age, snail mail versus email. It's completely okay to send and receive correspondence via email, but it's also okay to send snail mail. I jokingly had a conversation with a clerk from down south of us who was excited that we were using email as our means of communication. But again, I think it's completely reliable and feasible to still use different forms of kind of correspondence as needed. Next tip or trick I would talk about is knowing your limitations. Again, I struggle with this, and my wife would laugh and joke at I take on too much and when I really shouldn't have. But don't be afraid to rely on those around you when necessary. I mentioned, hey, asking people to speak up, or asking your pastor or whomever for clarification on a motion. Don't, if you're someone who struggles with a computer, ask for assistance with that. If you're somebody who needs assistance in other avenues, or trying to maintain records, hey, I think it's completely necessary and acceptable to rely on those around you. We are a church family for a reason. Knowing your limitation also would mean, hey, train up a younger generation. I think these lessons do a great job in talking about, hey, growing our children and growing our younger members in to these church leadership roles. And so don't be afraid to take someone under your wing and say, hey, I'd like to show you how this works, because someday you could be this person. And importantly here, don't be afraid to do that. I think this younger generation is starving for information and starving for ways they can help, and a great opportunity for that. Lastly here, tips and tricks, communication. Speak up as a clerk when necessary. If that means that, hey, your pastor forgot something in a business meeting, or you need clarification on a motion, or you received this bit of correspondence and it wasn't acted on, or something like that, make sure we're speaking up and having those conversations as necessary. Again, we're not overruling anyone here or overstepping our bounds, but we are, again, providing the resources and the minutes and history to the church as needed. And then last little bit here, providing additional context or support when needed. You will find me, if there's a question in business meeting, I'll quickly be flipping back to previous minutes or motions in order to better understand if we've already acted on something, or what to do if we've already acted on something, or what that looked like from 3 months ago. Have those resources available, again, easily accessible when feasible for those around you. So last, I'll just open the floor for questions. I know I've rambled for about 35 minutes here, but am hopeful that someone was able to glean something from this. Any questions that would come from either Facebook or Zoom or text to Jeremy?
I give them in ways you wouldn't imagine. So I got a few for you. And those listening in, feel free to continue to put comments in chat or messenger or text. I'll take them any way that you need to send them. We do have a few already. We will begin with, should correspondence from people or churches be read immediately or wait until a conference?
I think that's a great question. I think it would be up to the individual church how they would prefer to kind of receive that correspondence. One of the things that I will often look to when I receive that correspondence is it something that needs either action or some sort of awareness by the church prior to business conference? And so if it is let's call it a Bible study that's being held here at the college in Franklin, and it's being done by a sister church or something else, and it is happening before our next business conference, it may be something that I stand up and make mention of. It wouldn't mean that there was need to document that necessarily as outside of business. We could still present that in business meeting the next time as a correspondence that had already expired, but super important there to kind of discuss. If it is something that could wait and is not happening prior to the next business conference, I think it's completely acceptable to present it at your next business conference once the church is assembled in that state.
Next one is interesting. What would happen if the church is having business conference and the clerk has forgotten the minutes?
They get fired. No, I'm kidding. I think that would be a special instance where preparation has not taken place. Clearly, I've been the person to forget the backpack and have to drive home during business meeting in order to get it. You know, those kids, they just cause our brains to forget things. That said, I think Either you could do one of two things. You could postpone business if it's at the will of the church in order to allow that to be received or grabbed. I think the other thing you could do is postpone the reading of those minutes until the next business meeting. So you would have an extra long discussion there when you're kind of presenting those minutes from the previous month or 2 months at that point.
This one's a little longer. During the reading of minutes, what happens if someone wants you to edit church minutes, but their change, I'm assuming that they are recommending, or recommendation is wrong? I'm going to assume that they mean something that you had recorded they thought was wrong, but it actually wasn't.
Yeah, I think that goes back to Brother Dean's and Brother Donnie's recommendation of making sure that we're documenting who the motion maker and who the second was to ensure we have clarification. I think also we would rely on the congregation. Do we feel that that was how the motion was made? And if so, are we comfortable with our records showing that that is what took place? One of the things that I found very interesting when I was first studying for an ordination service was we not only in the ordination service, we not only read the minutes where the individual was set aside to be ordained, but we also read the minutes from the next month stating that those minutes were read and approved. And why do we do that? Hey, it is confirming that there were no changes to those records the following month and confirming that the church was all in agreement.
Who can ask for church minutes? Are they public record?
I would say that probably depends on your church. I don't know that there would be a reason why there wouldn't be a need or wouldn't be a excuse to provide them publicly. I think the church is an independent body, and so it would probably be dictated in that individual church's bylaws or in an agreement of the church. If it was me and I had a request for a public or a request from the public in order to distribute some minutes, I would bring that before the church prior to distribution, just for an awareness and also approval of the church to distribute those.
Gotta know, keep them coming, people. We don't want to let Brother Chris off easy.
Listen, I think this is more than anybody else has got.
I'm assuming they meant, is there a resource that shows I'm going to add a couple words so you tell me if it's wrong. Is there a good resource that shows a formatting or a structure of minutes, letters, etc.?
Yeah, so Pendleton's manual does a great job kind of in the appendix of that manual to really discuss and kind of show that formatting. I think if we were to kind of pull that up tonight, we would be able to see that formatting really kind of dictates, hey, if we are documenting minutes, there are specific categories that we typically hold to, such as reading of previous minutes and treasurer's reports, correspondence, and old business, new business, all those types of things. As far as letters to and from sister churches, oftentimes those would be in reference to membership transfers or letters of recommendation. And again, Pendleton's manual has a great format for that in the back that we could provide copies of. Brother Tim's website has that all listed there as well.
You're in the clear.
I see Brother Dell made a note here that we should suggest the records show what letter or where a church's letter or letter of recommendation came from and what they received from that church. I absolutely agree. Personally, I document that when a church member would join from a sister church, we'll document where that creditive letter will be coming from. And then once that letter was received, it would be documented that was received from that church as well.
That's unless any come in the last minute here. That's all of our questions.
Awesome. I want to say thank you to those who tuned in. Apologize that I was rather wordy in some of this. I hope that it was a help to those out there, and more than happy to take questions at any point if you think of something after or you're watching later on. Again, appreciate your time, and appreciate Brother Jeremy being kind of the coordinator of this and doing the work that he's done with it.
We definitely want to thank Brother Harper for his time. He's tugging at my heartstrings. If you can see the picture of Macedonia there in his presentation. We definitely want to thank each and every one of our presenters. He jokes about it at the beginning, but there's an obvious reason that I picked him for this task, and the other brothers that have been so gracious to give their time and their attention and to be willing to give towards this. Definitely want to thank a lot of people who have made suggestions. Big thank you to Brother Jeff Moran, who's been a good mentor on this project and things. This is the end of our church leadership series. We will again get it uploaded and things of that nature here soon, and edited so that people can share. It will be on YouTube and things of that nature as well. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to reach out to us. We are going to be doing another series starting roughly, we're still working on timeline. We do have our presenter selected and topic selected, which will be revolving around Missionary Baptist Church history, one that I'm personally looking forward to as well, as we take a deep dive into our origins, where we come from. I don't know that we have an official title yet, but so to speak, from Jesus to present day. That will be coming sometime roughly around late September to early October. We want to take a pause as we begin to get into revival season and things of that nature. Let's all definitely be prayerful for our respective churches and the many revivals and meetings and everything else that will be going on between now and then. But we will get that information out as quickly as we can once we have everything solidified. So thank everyone again for joining, those that are watching as well, and those that have shared with members of the church online and everything else. My contact information should be on the Facebook page, but if you ever need anything or need to reach out, please feel free to. But hope everyone has a blessed night. Thank you again, Brother Harper.